In the heat of a humid summer night, when the neon reflections off rain-soaked pavement waged a silent war with the darkness, Officer Daniel Hargrove cruised the city streets with a mixture of determination and disaffection. His patrol car's radio crackled intermittently as he shifted his focus between routine calls and the nagging discontent that tugged at his soul. Hargrove was a hard-edged man with a troubled past, feeling the sting of bureaucracy and his own inner demons. That night, however, fate had prepared a twist that would alter the course of his life and question every shred of authority he had once blindly followed. Glancing in the rearview mirror, Hargrove noticed a lone sedan parked haphazardly beneath a flickering street lamp on the outskirts of town. Something about the car, a deep blue make with smudged windows, caught his attention. His instincts pricked at him in a way he couldn't quite explain, and within moments, he found himself pulling over. The reason was trivial at first, a minor traffic infraction, but it gradually transformed into something much more profound. When Hargrove approached the sedan, the quiet hum of the engine and the ambient city noise all seemed to converge into a single, ominous chord. The driver, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and tired eyes, appeared startled by the sudden presence of law enforcement. "Good evening, sir," Hargrove greeted in his gruff tone. "Do you know why I pulled you over tonight?" The man's lips trembled for a fraction of a second, as if contemplating whether truth would suffice or if his pride demanded a carefully rehearsed lie. I'm not sure," he stammered. "Is it something about my registration?" Although the explanation was plausible, something deeper struck Hargrove as he watched the man's anxious demeanor. His eyes, however innocently sad, seemed to hold entire libraries of unspoken stories. As formalities ensued, Hargrove's veteran instincts urged him to search the vehicle. Underneath the bureaucratic veneer of reason, he felt a surreptitious need to uncover secrets. The officer's mind was a battleground for ethical impulses and the pull of darker inclinations. "Step out of the car, please," Hargrove commanded brusquely, his gaze unwavering. The man hesitated before complying, each movement measured as if his life depended on every second that ticked by. It was then that Hargrove decided, before any proper warrant could be secured, to conduct an unauthorized search of the interior. The man's eyes widened as the cop fumbled through the vehicle's glove compartment, storage areas, and under the seats. He observed the officer's urgency, something not entirely consistent with typical protocol. In the muted light, sweat gathered on the man's brow as he whispered, "Please, what are you looking for?" Hargrove's pulse quickened in the silence of the confined space of the sedan. "Just checking for contraband." "You never know what might be hiding," came the curt reply. The man's hands trembled while resting on the worn leather of the seat, his inner anxiety swirling into desperate hope that an explanation might spare him undue harm. As Hargrove rummaged further, his eyes narrowly caught sight of a stack of legal briefs and a well-thumbed copy of the Constitution tucked into the back seat. At that moment, a flicker of recognition disarmed the officer's ferocity. The man, it turned out, was no ordinary citizen. It was the renowned civil rights attorney, Marcus Eldridge, known for his fearless battles against institutional injustice. The realization struck Hargrove like a thunderbolt, shaking the foundations of a career built on rigid adherence to the rules he now questioned. He paused, the legal documents still in hand, and stared at Marcus as if seeing him for the first time. Marcus, calming his rapid breaths and collecting the shattered pieces of his dignity, spoke in a measured, trembling tone. "Officer, I'm here because I'm involved in a case that might challenge some of your department's practices. If you could please explain why you're searching my car without a warrant." His voice, while soft, carried an intensity born of countless battles for justice. Hargrove's hardened features shifted into an expression of internal conflict. The weight of the documents pressed on him as he hesitated. I thought there might be evidence of something illegal," he mumbled, suddenly aware of the moral precipice on which he teetered. In that stilled moment, the city itself seemed to hold its breath. Marcus's eyes, a mirror of perseverance, met Hargrove's gaze. Evidence of what exactly? Because the briefcase in the trunk contains materials related to a case on police misconduct. And if you're suggesting I'm hiding something illicit, you might be the very person responsible for that misconduct. The accusation, though calm and near icy in its delivery, rang out like a challenge in the quiet street. Hargrove's mind raced with memories of painful encounters, of orders unquestioned, and of personal sorrow that had driven him to dark corners. The inherent corruption he once stewarded now nagged at him, a constant reminder that, at times, the law itself could become a bludgeon aimed at those too weak or too brave to fight back. As the complexities of the situation unfurled, time seemed to elongate. Marcus's protests grew firmer, and his composure bolstered by years of grappling with systemic injustice, while Officer Hargrove battled his personal demons. Each second pressed the two men into a silent duel of ideology, a confrontation between duty and conscience. "I'm just doing my job," Hargrove insisted in a rasp that barely concealed his inner uncertainty, though his eyes betrayed that unspoken debate raging behind them. Marcus calmly replied, "And I'm trying to do mine." Justice, when perverted by misuse of power, loses its way. "Please, let's talk about this, properly." The suggestion of dialogue unsettled Hargrove. In his training, confrontation and decisive action were valued above negotiation, and admitting uncertainty was tantamount to weakness. He clutched the legal documents tighter as his heart pounded, multiple layers of fear and self-loathing intermingling as he realized how far he had strayed from the path of righteousness. The car, for a brief moment, became a confessional. In the tight, suffocating space, the minutiae of a man's choices, each action, each neglected moral checkpoint, reflected the larger, silent collapse of systems built to protect and serve. Marcus, with his calm demeanor and steady eyes, appeared both defiant and compassionate, a beacon of righteousness amid the chaotic storm of shaking certainties. The streets around them no longer felt safe, and the echo of distant sirens underscored the real intimacy of the encounter. Hargrove's thoughts, swirling with fear of the consequences of his own actions and the possibility of an internal reckoning, eventually took hold of his decision-making process. "All right," he said, lowering his voice as if the words might vanish into the humid night. "Let's talk. But I'm warning you, if I find anything incriminating." His sentence trailed off into uncertainty, the threat hanging unanswered between them. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his tone sincere and quiet. "Officer, I have nothing to hide, but perhaps you have something to confess." The challenge resonated in the confined space, and Hargrove's internal conflict deepened. For a long moment the silence reigned, punctuated only by the rhythmic tapping of rain against the car's metal roof. Outside, sirens wailed in a distant dirge, and inside, the burdens of a life shaped by the collision of law and morality pressed in from all sides. In that prolonged pause, the question was not only of legality, but of accountability, a question that, beneath the veneer of routine policing, revealed the raw humanity hidden in each individual. The officer's eyes darted nervously towards his dashboard, where memories of past missteps flickered like ghosts in the dim light. Marcus continued, his voice soft yet insistent. "I know the law's supposed to be blind, but sometimes it needs to see the truth." The statement, simple and direct, struck at the heart of Hargrove's inner conflict. He began to speak haltingly about his own experiences, instances where orders had seemed unjust, where he'd been forced to act in ways that now seemed illegitimate in retrospect. The confession, though not fully articulated, was enough to open a rift inside him. "I've seen things, done things," Hargrove admitted in a near whisper, his hand trembling as he returned the legal briefs to their rightful place. "And tonight, I—" Marcus interjected gently, "Tonight, we have a chance to set things right, either through your confession or by finding the error in our system." The sincerity in his voice pierced through the haze of the officer's turmoil, leaving behind a fragile hope amid the darkness. The conversation shifted, the fight receding as the two men found themselves mired in unexpected intimacy, a convergence of two worlds, neither wholly right nor entirely wrong, but both desperate to redeem themselves. As the minutes passed heavy with shared vulnerabilities, Hargrove's rigidity began to crumble. His voice, trembling with a mixture of regret and resignation, broke the silence. "I was told to search your car without waiting for a warrant. I thought it was justified because, well, sometimes rules get in the way of what's truly important." The admission was raw and painful, an exposure of the internal corruption that had taken root. Marcus, who had weathered storms of misinterpretation and abuse of authority throughout his career, listened intently. "Officer, the law is meant to serve justice, not just order. Sometimes our instincts override our compassion, but that doesn't make us any less human." A stark honesty bridged the chasm between them, and even as the tension of that fateful moment persisted, both men sensed an unspoken opportunity for reform. The initial act of a search had morphed into a deeper dialogue about power, accountability, and the blurred boundaries between right and wrong. The quiet murmur of shared secrets filled the confined automobile as Hargrove, for perhaps the first time in his years of service, began doubting the moral righteousness of his orders. His internal voice, long silenced by years of conformity, stirred up a clarion call for justice that transcended his previously narrow perspective. When a radio dispatch crackled through the silence, summoning Hargrove to another call, neither man moved immediately. They both sat in thought, Hargrove, with the weight of his confessions at that moment spinning in the recesses of his conscience, and Marcus, with the quiet hope that the officer might yet be redeemed. The dispatch, a mundane reminder of the paradigm that governed Hargrove's career, briefly interrupted their private exchange. "I have to go," Hargrove said finally, his tone laden with regret. "But I promise I won't forget what we talked about here tonight." His admission felt like a silent contract between lost souls fighting battles on opposite ends of the law's spectrum. Marcus nodded slowly, understanding too well the tragic inevitability of their roles. "I hope you find your way back to the justice you once believed in, officer." The words, though gentle, carried a weight that transcended the immediate circumstance. Hargrove stepped back to his patrol car, every movement steeped in remorse and determination alike, a quiet metamorphosis already underway. He drove off into the night, leaving behind the sedan and its troubled passenger, the memory of this encounter etched into a fragile hope for reforming a broken system. As the night wore on, Hargrove found himself caught between duty and destiny. The echo of Marcus's words reverberated in his mind as he responded to further calls, a domestic disturbance here, a petty theft there, each incident now cast in the light of his newfound self-reflection. Yet, with every dispatch, the officer wrestled with the tension between what was expected of him and what he sensed was morally right. The pages of his past, the unchecked abuses, the small rebellions against unjust orders, now beckoned him with a quiet intensity he could no longer ignore. In the dim glow of the overhead streetlights on his patrol route, Hargrove recalled another night, years earlier, when he had been forced to ignore his own doubts in favor of obedience. That event had carved a deep wound in him, one that had festered over time until the guilt had begun to weigh him down. Now, as he cruised along familiar avenues that suddenly felt unfamiliar, the internal conflict burned brighter than ever. The spark from that chance encounter with Marcus ignited an inner dialogue that challenged everything he had once held sacred, the unequivocal nature of right and wrong. His hands gripped the steering wheel as he resolved that the next time he encountered a moment of moral ambiguity, he would not shy away in fear. Over the upcoming days, as news of the unauthorized search began to circulate, whispers reached both the media and human rights groups. The story of an officer violating protocol only to be confronted by the very man he was meant to intimidate resonated with people far and wide. Local journalists and activists debated whether the story was a damning indictment of police misconduct or an isolated incident destined to be swallowed up by public apathy. Amid the tumult, Marcus Eldridge became an inadvertent symbol, a reminder that those who sought to defend individual rights often had to navigate perilous territory. In his humble office, lined with shelves crammed with legal treatises and memorial plaques dedicated to civil rights heroes of the past, Marcus deliberated on the implications. "This isn't just about one unauthorized search," he mused to a colleague one rainy afternoon. "It's a window into how easily our protections can be compromised when fear and blind obedience become the norm." The case soon became a catalyst for an internal review within the department. Rumors swirled among officers and civilians alike, and whispers of reform mingled with voices of dissent. Hargrove found himself subject to an inquiry, a process that threatened to expose his deviation from protocol. Yet, even as a disciplinary board scrutinized his actions, there was an undeniable air of transformation about him. In a private meeting with his superior, a stern, by-the-book captain known as Evelyn Morris, Hargrove recounted the incident in careful detail. "Captain Morris, I understand I acted outside the strict boundaries of the law. But I was compelled, in that moment, by what I believed was a deeper truth about justice." His voice wavered as he sought to justify his behavior, not by reciting legal technicalities but by appealing to a sense of moral integrity. Captain Morris, whose years in service had taught her that the law was both an armor and a chain, listened thoughtfully. "Officer Hargrove," she replied measuredly, "we are duty-bound to uphold the law. However, we are also entrusted with ensuring that justice is wisely administered. I will have this matter thoroughly investigated, but know that you have opened a necessary dialogue." Those words, though professional and measured, subtly hinted at an institutional acknowledgement that the path of perfect obedience sometimes led to artifacts of injustice. Over the ensuing weeks, as Hargrove awaited the final outcome of the inquiry, his inner life was in turmoil. He visited a dilapidated park bench near an abandoned lot, a spot where the city's wounds were visible in graffiti and discarded memories, and allowed himself a few solitary moments of introspection. It was here that he reflected on the irony of his situation. A man who had once been a steadfast enforcer of an inflexible system had been confronted by a voice of uncompromising integrity. His mind wandered to long-forgotten sights, a glimpse of his father standing tall in an old photograph, a simpler time before he had become entangled in a labyrinth of orders he no longer fully endorsed. In that transient pause on a cold, rain-misted morning, Hargrove vowed to seek a new equilibrium, one where the law could be a tool for genuine justice rather than a mechanism of oppression. In parallel, Marcus Eldridge continued his tireless advocacy work. His encounter with Officer Hargrove had energized him in unexpected ways. His schedule, once determined solely by court dates and client meetings, now included speaking to community centers about proper police conduct and the necessity for accountability. "We must build bridges even with those who enforce the law," Marcus would often say passionately at town halls. An honest conversation can be the first step toward reforming the very institution we trust to protect our rights. Among the community, tales of the car encounter became a legend of sorts, a story echoing the possibility that even those immersed in the system could be awakened by the call to conscience. Newspaper editorials debated the legal ramifications of Hargrove's search and the ethical dimensions it unveiled, inviting citizens to question the rigid dichotomy of us versus them that had long characterized the relationship between law enforcement and the public. Meanwhile, in the corridors of the police department, murmurs of change began to ripple through the ranks. Some officers, hardened by years of chasing criminals under the neon watch of the city, started questioning the blind adherence to orders that often led them astray. Young recruits, full of the fire of idealism, listened eagerly to the quiet yet potent hints of reform. In hushed conversations during coffee breaks and after-shift gatherings, stories of Hargrove's unauthorized search, the details of his confessions in moments of silent vulnerability, circulated like urban legends. Many wondered if it signified the beginning of a broader reckoning within the department, a reckoning where tradition might yield to the demands of moral clarity. As weeks turned into months, the disciplinary inquiry slowly came to a close. The board, led by Captain Morris, faced a delicate balancing act, holding an officer accountable for a breach of protocol while acknowledging the unusual ethical circumstances underlying his actions. In a public statement that resonated beyond the sterile halls of the precinct, the department declared, "While Officer Hargrove's actions did contravene established protocol, his testimony has shed light on the complexities inherent in enforcing the law with absolute impartiality. We are committed to ensuring that our processes are reviewed and enhanced so that every citizen's rights are protected, and so that our officers are guided by both duty and conscience." That statement reverberated throughout the community and the legal world, igniting debates in courtrooms and legislative halls alike. For Hargrove, the resolution of the inquiry was bittersweet. The board chose to issue a formal reprimand rather than pursue more severe disciplinary actions. Yet the personal cost was immeasurable, a cost measured in the loss of the certainties he had once clung to. Sitting in his modest apartment in a quiet neighborhood far removed from the flash and noise of the city center, Hargrove stared out the rain-streaked window for hours, grappling with the new contours of his identity. He knew that even though his career was far from over, he would have to walk a precarious path between order and humanity. "I once believed that justice was black and white," he murmured to the silent room. "Now I know it is painted in shades of gray." The confession was personal, a vow to himself to continuously strive for a higher understanding of the role he played in a flawed system. In the months following, as reforms within the department began to take root and public awareness of civil rights issues grew, Marcus Eldridge became a frequent guest on local radio shows and panel discussions. He addressed issues of accountability and the need for empathy in law enforcement, citing his encounter with Officer Hargrove not as an isolated incident but as a microcosm of a broader societal reckoning. "When we allow fear to dictate our actions," he warned during one particularly poignant broadcast, "we sacrifice the very liberties we are sworn to protect." The case of Officer Hargrove is a stark reminder that every act of defiance, when born of an honest search for truth, can be the spark that ignites meaningful change. Listeners, many of whom had long felt marginalized by a system that often treated them with indifference or outright hostility, found solace and hope in his words. Marcus's narrative was not one of triumph over adversity so much as it was a testament to the ceaseless struggle for recognition of one's inherent dignity in the face of institutional inertia. One crisp autumn evening, nearly a year after that fateful search, an unexpected turn of events brought Hargrove and Marcus together again. The city was hosting a community forum on police reform, a public event intended to bridge the gap between law enforcement and the people they served. The forum, organized by a coalition of civic leaders and civil rights activists, attracted a diverse audience: community elders, young activists, police officers, and local politicians who were all eager to participate in a dialogue about moving forward together. Hargrove, now a changed man who carried his reprimand more as a badge of transformation rather than a mark of disgrace, hesitantly accepted an invitation to attend in a non-official capacity. His decision stemmed, in large measure, from a desire to share his evolving perspective, and perhaps to atone for the part he had played in a system that too often eschewed compassion for rigid formality. Marcus, too, was among the speakers. He took the stage with his characteristic calm, recounting his storied career and the encounters that had led him to become an unwavering advocate for civil rights. When his narrative reached the chapter of that rainy night, the unauthorized search that had unexpectedly uncovered the spark of accountability, he paused, scanning the room as if challenging each listener to confront their own beliefs. "We are all capable of error," he said softly, "but it is our courage to admit and learn from those errors that defines us." The audience erupted in applause, not merely for the eloquence of his statement, but for the raw honesty with which he recounted not only how far one must sometimes fall to rediscover the path of justice, but also the quiet redemption that awaits those who dare to listen to their conscience. After the event, as people mingled and the echoes of passionate debate dwindled into softer conversations, Hargrove approached Marcus. There, in the fading light of a public park behind the community center, the two men stood side by side, a policeman and a lawyer, united not by their former roles, but by their shared commitment to a more humane concept of justice. "I've been thinking," Hargrove began haltingly, "about the choices I made that night and the orders I followed without question. I know I cannot erase my past mistakes, but I want to believe that I can help change things for the better. Perhaps, in time, I can serve as an example of how even those who have faltered might be guided back by their conscience." Marcus regarded him soberly, then offered a small, affirming smile. "Change is never easy, Daniel, but it is through our struggles that we come to understand what is right. I see a glimmer in you, a spark that, if nurtured, can transform not just your life, but inspire others to strive for justice as well." That conversation, reflective and earnest, marked the beginning of an unlikely friendship. In the months that followed, amid ongoing departmental reforms and heated public debate, Hargrove became an advocate for internal review boards and increased accountability within his department, speaking at training sessions and quietly mentoring younger officers who questioned the rigidity of long-held procedures. Though his past misdeeds were never fully expunged from his record, They served instead as a somber reminder that sometimes the harshest lessons had the power to incite the most profound change. Marcus, in turn, became an invaluable ally in Hargrove's journey, a source of legal insight, moral support, and a bridge to communities that had long suffered under the weight of institutional neglect. Together, they embarked on a series of local initiatives aimed at fostering dialogue between the police force and citizens, holding town hall meetings in neighborhoods where mistrust had festered for decades. Over cups of steaming coffee in modest community centers, they listened to the grievances of families, shared technical details of legal recourse, and even conducted workshops on how to hold authorities accountable in a system rife with hidden complexities. Through these joint efforts, a ripple of transformation began to spread, an echo of the unexpected encounter in that solitary sedan that had once ignited a burst of untended hope in a troubled heart. On a brisk winter's day, as residents lined up at a local courthouse for a community meeting on civil liberties, Hargrove and Marcus found themselves side by side once again. The conversation turned towards reconciling individual freedoms with societal responsibilities, a debate that had divided people for generations. Hargrove's voice, though still resonant with the rough timbre of his past, now carried the calm authority of someone who had learned from his mistakes. "There is no simple answer," he remarked to the gathered crowd. "But we can acknowledge that mistakes have been made, and that transformation is possible when we choose to learn from them rather than hide behind blind obedience." His words mingled with expressions of agreement and guarded hope, a reminder that justice was a living dialogue that required constant nurturing and vigilance. As the months turned once more with the seasons, the story of Officer Hargrove's unauthorized search and its unforeseen consequences blossomed into a symbol of redemption, a narrative of justice that found its voice in the unity of disparate paths. In quiet newspaper interviews and open forum discussions, the public came to recognize that the encounter was not merely a transgression of protocol, but a profound lesson in the delicate balance between law and morality. The image of Hargrove and Marcus standing together, a policeman whose eyes had seen the cost of unquestioned authority, and a lawyer who championed the inherent dignity of every person, became a beacon for those who believed that systems built by flawed humans might yet be reformed by human hearts awakened to truth. In private, Hargrove often recalled the haunting moments leading up to that fateful night. In his solitude, his mind replayed the cascade of events, the hesitation before ordering the search, the trembling hands rifling through documents, and the inevitable discovery that had shattered the facade of a simple traffic stop. Each memory was a quiet reminder that the system he had once defended without reservation was susceptible to its own set of missteps. And yet, amid the darkness of his regret, a quiet light of redemption had emerged, a spark of defiance against the inertia of conformity. The man he had encountered in the back seat had, inadvertently and with quiet dignity, set him on a path of self-examination that would steer his future actions away from cruelty and towards genuine accountability. In an era when headlines often painted policemen as villains and lawyers as idealists, the complex interplay between Hargrove and Marcus served as a testament to the fact that human nature could not be easily tagged with simplistic labels. Their journey, fraught with missteps, revelations, and ultimately, a mutual understanding, underscored the transformative power of empathy and the importance of questioning long-held assumptions about right and wrong. As crime statistics fluctuated and policy debates raged over the effectiveness of force versus compassion, many in the community found themselves reflecting on what justice really meant. It was not the militaristic enforcement of orders, but rather the recognition that behind every uniform and every legal brief lay an individual capable of both error and redemption. One crisp spring afternoon, as sunlight filtered through the canopy of budding trees in a public park, Hargrove and Marcus shared a quiet moment on a weathered bench. The park was filled with the laughter of children and the gentle murmur of conversation among local residents, a living canvas of hope after years of discord. Hargrove, whose eyes now bore a hint of both weariness and resolve, quietly remarked, "You know, Marcus, I once thought that following orders was the only way to keep my job, and my honor. But life has taught me that honor is not found in blind compliance. It's earned by questioning, by holding oneself accountable in moments of uncertainty." Marcus nodded, his expression one of compassionate understanding. And sometimes the bravest act is not in raising your baton or reciting the law, but in admitting that we have been wrong and that we must change before we hurt those we're supposed to protect. Their conversation, though seemingly casual, encapsulated a seismic shift in the mindset of a man who had once been defined solely by the rigidity of his profession, a quiet metamorphosis into someone who recognized that humanizing the law was a necessary act in reuniting a fractured community. News outlets eventually caught wind of their evolving partnership, and the narrative expanded into public discourse. Editorials debated whether Hargrove's transformation was a sign of systemic reform or an isolated instance of contrition. Public intellectuals and legal scholars weighed in on the delicate interplay between procedure and morality, with one influential legal analyst writing, "What we witnessed in that stolen moment of vulnerability is the potential for every institution to renew itself when those within it dare to question." Officer Hargrove's journey reminds us that the law is a living thing, nurtured by both tradition and the courage it takes to reimagine it. Such reflections resonated deeply with many citizens who had long felt that the scales of justice were imbalanced, a sentiment that now, thanks to the unlikely bond between an officer and a civil rights attorney, seemed on the brink of correction. As the city faced its share of challenges, a rise in community unrest, debates over resource allocation, and the omnipresent shadow of forgotten tragedies, the remnants of that transformative night continued to ripple outward. In the quiet journey of everyday life, where each person navigated their own struggles and triumphs, the interplay of flawed human nature and the possibility of growth had become an enduring metaphor. Officer Hargrove's private confessions had taken on a public significance, reminding everyone that redemption was not solely the domain of the virtuous, but was available even to those who had once walked dark paths. And as Marcus Eldridge continued to champion the cause of civil rights with unwavering determination, their shared experiences fostered hope that perhaps one day the integrity of law enforcement might coexist harmoniously with genuine compassion. Years later, when historians look back on this period of transformation, the story of that rainy night in which a cop illegally searched a man's car and discovered in its depths the soul of a dedicated civil rights attorney would be cited as a turning point in the evolution of local justice. They would speak of the meeting in hushed tones, noting how two very different lives crossed paths in a moment that defied easy categorization. In classrooms and community centers alike, the tale was recounted as a lesson in the importance of questioning authority, in the power of vulnerability, and in the enduring possibility of change when individuals dare to stand for compassion rather than conformity. In a final reflective moment many years later, Officer Hargrove, long since retired, sat in his study surrounded by mementos of a life both weighed down by regret and elevated by the pursuit of redemption. Reading aloud from a letter penned by Marcus Eldridge on the anniversary of that defining encounter, Hargrove's voice trembled with both sorrow and gratitude. "We are all flawed, each of us burdened by the choices we once made in the name of duty. Yet in recognizing those errors, we find the courage to better ourselves, and in doing so, to better the world. Let this be our legacy, that even in a system marred by human failings, the search for truth and justice may someday prevail with the light of honest hearts." In that solitary recitation, the echoes of a life lived on the edges of morality found solace, a quiet reminder that every step toward accountability was a step toward a more just society. Thus, the legacy of that single encounter transcended the boundaries of legality and procedure, embedding itself into the collective memory of a community that had long yearned for change. It stood as a testament to the belief that no matter how deep the scars of the past, every soul had the potential for renewal when guided by a gentle yet unwavering call to justice. And so, as dusk settled over the city once more, the streets whispered the timeless truth that even in the face of grave errors and unavoidable transgressions, there lay the promise of transformation, a promise that justice, when pursued with compassion and introspection, could indeed heal the wounds of a broken society.